My name is Mira, and I spent 8 months of my life building the project that got my coworker promoted. I want you to sit in that conference room with me for a second, because I've replayed it 1,000 times. It's a Thursday. The whole leadership team is there. The client's logo is up on the big screen, and my coworker Derek is standing at the front of the room in a blazer he bought for the occasion, clicking through 8 months of my work, slide by slide. The architecture I designed, the system I built, the problem nobody else could solve, that I solved at 2 a.m. more times than I can count. And the whole time, Derek is saying, I. He's saying my approach. He's saying what I did here was. And I'm sitting in the back row, in the seat nobody looks at, watching a man I'd spent 8 months carrying collect a standing ovation and a promotion for work he could not have done if his life depended on it. When it was over, our director clapped Derek on the shoulder and called him the future of the company. Somebody asked me to get the room reset for the next meeting. Let that sit for a second. The woman who had just had 8 months of her life presented as someone else's triumph was asked, in the same breath, to stack the chairs. And I did it. I stacked the chairs, because that's who I'd trained myself to be. Agreeable, useful, invisible. And I went home that night to my apartment, to my 6-year-old daughter and a babysitter I could barely afford. And I paid the sitter the money I couldn't spare. And I read Zoe one story and then a second one, because she asked. And after she fell asleep, I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark, and I did not cry. I waited for it. I expected to fall apart. I'd certainly earned a collapse, and it didn't come. Because somewhere between that conference room and my front door, underneath the humiliation, a very calm and very clear thought had arrived and quietly taken charge, and it was this: Derek could take the credit. But Derek could not do the work. He had never been able to do the work. And in about 3 weeks, the client was going to need the work done, the real work, the hard part, the part no presentation can fake. And when that day came, there was exactly one person on earth they were going to ask for. And it wasn't going to be the man in the new blazer. It was going to be me. By name. I just had to be patient enough to let it happen. Welcome to Composed Drama Stories, where the women everyone underestimated finally tell their side. If quiet strength and slow justice are your kind of evening, stay with me. Now, I know what you're expecting. You're expecting the part where I march into HR with a folder full of emails and timestamps and prove that I did the work. And I want to tell you right now, that is not what happened. And the reason it's not what happened is the whole point of this story. Because I learned something over that whole brutal year that I want to give to you. There is a kind of theft you cannot fight by proving you were robbed. You can only fight it by being the one thing the thief can never steal. I'm going to take you to the status call where the client said one sentence that detonated the whole thing, and to the conversation where my own boss came crawling to my desk and offered me everything they'd stolen. Gift-wrapped, and I'm going to tell you why I said no. But to understand the choice I made, and why it set me free, you have to understand how I ended up in that back row seat in the first place. So let me take you back. I am a software engineer. I worked at a software consulting firm in Seattle, the kind of company that big corporations hire to come in and build the complicated systems they can't build themselves. If a company's whole operation is grinding to a halt because the platform that runs it is held together with tape and prayers, they call a firm like mine. And a team like mine comes in and rebuilds the engine while the plane is still flying. It is hard, invisible, high-stakes work. And I was good at it. I was better than good at it. I was, though it took me years to let myself say it, one of the best engineers in that entire building. I don't say that to brag, I say it because it's the load-bearing fact of this whole story, and because women like me are trained our whole lives to whisper our competence and shout our gratitude, and I'm done with that. I was the best engineer in the building. That's just true. But here is the thing about being the best engineer in the building when you are also a quiet woman who keeps her head down and does the work. Nobody knows. Because the work itself is invisible. When I do my job perfectly, what happens is that nothing happens, the system runs, the client's business hums along, and no one ever sees the 10 disasters I quietly prevented at midnight. I had spent my whole career being the person things ran on, and learning the hard lesson that the person things run on is the easiest person in the world to overlook, precisely because she never lets anything break. I'd seen the pattern my whole career, if I'm honest. In meetings, I'd say the thing quietly, and it would land in the room and die. And then 10 minutes later, a man would say the same thing louder, and the room would nod like he'd invented fire. I'd write the document that solved the problem, and someone else would present it. I'd be the one 3 engineers came to privately when they were stuck, the one who unblocked everyone. And at review time, my manager would call me reliable, and a great team player, words that sound like compliments and function like a ceiling. Reliable, a great team player. I had come to understand that in a certain kind of workplace. Those words are what they call you right before they pass you over, because the reliable team player is too useful where she is to ever promote. I want to tell you who I was outside that office too, because it matters to the stakes. I'm a single mom. My daughter Zoe was 6 that year, and it was just the 2 of us. Her father had been gone a long time, and I was the whole show, the income, the insurance, the rent on a 1-bedroom in a city that gets more expensive every year. I budgeted in my head constantly, a quiet running tally that never shut off. Daycare, groceries, the car that was making a noise I was praying, wasn't serious. So when I tell you I needed that promotion, I don't mean I wanted recognition for my ego. I mean the senior engineer role I'd been working toward came with a raise that would have meant I could stop lying awake doing math at 3 a.m. It would have meant Zoe's daycare wasn't a monthly crisis. It would have meant I could build her a little cushion, a little safety, the thing I'd never had myself. That promotion wasn't a trophy to me. It was oxygen. I want you to hold that word, because it's why what Derek did wasn't just an insult. It was taking food off my daughter's table and calling it teamwork. And then there was Derek. Let me describe Derek precisely, because Derek is a type, and you have almost certainly met him. Derek was charming. Derek had the firm handshake and the easy laugh and the gift, the real and genuine gift of making powerful people feel good about themselves. Derek was the guy who spoke first and loudest in every meeting, who said the obvious thing with so much confidence that it sounded like insight, who could stand up with no preparation and talk for 10 minutes and leave a room feeling like they'd witnessed brilliance, when if you actually wrote down what he'd said, there was nothing there. Derek managed up like it was an Olympic sport. He spent the energy on his boss's impression of him that the rest of us spent on the actual work. And here is what you have to understand, because it's the engine of this whole story. Derek was not a good engineer. He wasn't even an average one. The actual building of things, the deep, hard, lonely work of making a complex system genuinely function, Derek couldn't do it. And somewhere underneath all that confidence, Derek knew he couldn't do it. I think that's the secret engine inside every person like Derek, actually. a quiet, buried terror of being found out, which is exactly why they spend so much energy on the performance. The performance isn't vanity. It's camouflage. So he had built his entire career on a different skill. He found the people who could do the work, the quiet ones, the heads-down ones, the ones too busy building to manage their own reputations, and he attached himself to them, and made himself pleasant and useful seeming, and always present at the moment the work got shown to the people who hand out promotions. He was a remora. If you don't know the word, it's that little fish that fastens itself to a shark and rides along, eating the scraps, going where the shark goes, doing none of the swimming. Derek had been riding sharks his whole life. He'd just never found one as productive as me, and he'd never been forced, not once, into water where he had to swim on his own. The cruelest part is that I'd been useful to him long before this project, in small ways, and I'd let it slide the way you do. He'd ask me to take a quick look at something and then present my fix as his. He'd absorb my idea in a hallway and float it in a meeting an hour later. I'd told myself it didn't matter, that the work was what mattered, that I didn't need the credit. I'd been so proud of not needing the credit. What I hadn't understood until that conference room is that in a place run by Rogers, refusing to fight for credit isn't humility. It's just handing your career, year after year, to whoever's willing to take it. The project was called the Platform Rebuild, and it was the biggest contract our firm had. Our client, I'll call them by the name of the woman who ran their side of it, because she's the one who matters. A sharp, no-nonsense director of engineering named Aisha. Our client's entire business ran on a platform that was, when we arrived, dying. 15 years of patches and shortcuts, falling over constantly, costing them a fortune every time it crashed. Our job was to rebuild it from the inside out without ever turning it off. Open heart surgery on a running heart. It was the hardest thing I'd ever been asked to do, and I wanted it more than I'd wanted anything professionally in my life. Because I knew that if I pulled it off, no one would ever be able to call me overlooked again. So I did it. For 8 months, I lived inside that system. I designed the new architecture, the bones of it, the way every piece would talk to every other piece. I wrote the core of it myself, line by line, the hardest parts, the parts that had to be perfect, because everything else would stand on them. I was the one on the calls at 1 a.m, when something broke in a way nobody had anticipated, the one tracing a failure backward through 100,000 moving parts until I found the single thing that was wrong. Because I understood how every piece fit together, I understood it. Because I had placed every piece myself, with my own hands, in the dark, while the rest of the company slept. Let me tell you about one of those nights, because it stands in for all of them. 3 months in, the old system, the one we were rebuilding, while it was still running the client's entire business, started failing in a way that threatened to take everything down. It was 11 at night. I had a sick 6-year-old asleep in the next room and a work laptop open on my kitchen table, and for the next 6 hours, I held that client's entire operation together with my bare hands over a video call, while their on-call team watched and trusted me to land the plane. By dawn, it was stable. The client never even knew how close they'd come to a catastrophe, which is exactly the point when I do my job perfectly. The disaster is the thing that doesn't happen, the headline that never gets written. I went and made Zoe pancakes and took her to school on no sleep, and nobody at my firm ever knew that night happened either. Except one person on the client's side who'd been on that call the whole time, watching. Her name was Aisha. Remember that. And I was the one who worked directly with Aisha and her team on the client side, day after day, problem after problem, sitting in the trenches with them while their business depended on us getting it right. Aisha and I built something over those months that you cannot fake and you cannot transfer. Trust. She knew my voice on a crisis call. She knew that when Mira said it would be handled, it was handled. She had watched me solve problems her own team had called impossible. That trust was real, and it was mine. And remember it, because it becomes everything. And where was Derek for those 8 months? Derek was the lead. On paper. Derek came to the status meetings and summarized, in confident language, the work I had done. Derek built the slides. Derek took Aisha's boss out to a nice lunch. Derek learned just enough of the vocabulary to sound fluent in a room full of executives who couldn't tell the difference. He was, functionally, my publicist, except he was getting paid more than me, and he was about to take everything. Because the project landed. We delivered. The new platform went live. And it was a triumph. The client's business stopped crashing, they saved a fortune, the contract got renewed and expanded. It was, by any measure, one of the most successful projects our firm had ever done. And that is when Derek made his move. That conference room. That Thursday, the presentation where Derek stood up and walked our entire leadership team through 8 months of my work, saying I and my approach, 8 months of my late nights and my architecture and my trust with the client, and turned it into the story of his triumph. I sat in the back and I watched it happen in real time. And I want to describe the specific horror of it, because if you've lived it, you know, and if you haven't, you need to understand how it actually feels. It's not one big theft. It's 100 tiny ones, in a row, faster than you can object to any single one. He'd put up a slide showing the architecture I'd designed and say the approach I landed on here. He'd describe a problem I'd solved at 1 a.m, and say so I dug into it and figured out. Every time, I'd feel the impulse to say something. And every time, I'd realize there was no way to say it that wouldn't make me the crazy person interrupting the celebration to say, actually, that was me. The structure of the moment was airtight. To object even once would have made me the villain of my own robbery. So I sat there, and I smiled when people glanced my way, and I let a man collect a standing ovation for the hardest and best work of my entire life, and I felt something in me go very quiet and very cold. And it worked. Oh, it worked beautifully. At the end of it, our director, a man named Roger, who loved Derek the way men like Roger always love men like Derek. Because Derek made everything sound easy and made Roger feel smart, Roger announced, right there, that Derek was being promoted to principal engineer and would be the overall lead on the platform's next phase. The big one. The expansion, a promotion with Derek's name on it, built entirely out of my work. And the senior role I'd been promised, the one that was oxygen for me and my daughter? Roger pulled me aside afterward, in the hallway, with the warm, oblivious cruelty of a man who thinks he's being kind, and he put a hand on my shoulder and said, "Mira, you're such a crucial part of this team, such a great team player. We're really going to need you to support Derek in this next phase. Support Derek." He actually said it, and he said it like he was handing me a gift. The man who couldn't write a line of working code was going to lead, and I, who had built the entire thing, was going to support him. And my promotion was, in that same warm breath, Quietly gone there just wasn't room in the budget this cycle, Roger said. But they'd revisit it next time. Next time. I had been hearing about next time for years. I drove home that night with my hands steady on the wheel and a fire in my chest that I had never felt before in my life. Not the hot, useless kind of anger that burns itself out by morning. The cold, patient, clarifying kind, the kind that doesn't shout. The kind that makes a plan. Now here is where the story turns, and I want to slow down, because this is the part I'm proudest of, and it's the part that surprises people. Everyone who hears this story tells me what I should have done. I should have gone to HR. I should have pulled up the version history, the commit logs, the emails, the timestamps, and in my line of work, that's all there. By the way, the record of who actually wrote what is sitting right there in the system. And I could have printed it out and proven, beyond any doubt, that Derek had written almost none of it. I could have built a case. I could have marched into Roger's office with a folder and demanded justice. And I want to tell you why I didn't. Because it's the most important decision I made. I didn't. Because I had watched it happen to other people. And I knew exactly how it goes. The quiet, competent woman walks into HR with her folder of proof that she did the work. And do you know what she becomes instantly in the story of that company? She becomes difficult. She becomes the bitter one. The one who can't be a team player. The one who's making it about credit instead of focusing on the work. Derek would put on a wounded, reasonable face and say, of course, Mira contributed. She's a wonderful engineer. He never meant to take anything away from her, and he'd sound so gracious, and I'd sound so bitter, and Roger, who had already decided who his golden boy was, would file me under problem and Derek under victim of a jealous colleague. I had seen it happen, more than once, to people better than me. The folder never works. Proving you were robbed inside an office just makes you the person making everyone uncomfortable by talking about the robbery. The system was not built to give me justice. It was built to protect the Derricks. Because the Derricks are the ones who make the Rogers feel good. And an institution will always protect the people who make its leaders feel good over the people who merely keep its lights on. I sat with that the night after the promotion, and it was a bitter pill. Because part of me wanted to fight so badly my hands shook. I wanted to stand up in a meeting and tell the truth. But I forced myself to think it all the way through, like an engineering problem. Like tracing a failure backward to its actual root cause. And the root cause wasn't that the truth was hidden. Everyone who'd worked closely with that project, on a technical level, already half knew who'd really built it. The problem was that knowing the truth and being willing to act on it are two different things, and no one with power had any incentive to act. Because Derek was useful to them exactly as he was. A folder wouldn't change anyone's incentives. So I asked myself a different question. The only useful one. Not, how do I prove I did it? But what do I have that they actually need, that they cannot get from Derek, no matter how much they'd prefer to? And the answer to that question changed my whole life. He had taken the credit for the work. But he had not taken the ability to do the work. And he had not taken Aisha's trust that was built on 8 months of me, on 100 crisis calls, on a relationship he had never once been part of. Derek had the trophy. I still had the hands that made it. And I knew something that Roger and Derek, in their celebration, had completely forgotten in the glow of that presentation. The project wasn't over. The hardest part was still coming. Let me explain. In plain terms, because the mechanics matter. Delivering the first version of that platform was enormous, but the next phase, the expansion Derek had just been promoted to lead, was harder. It meant taking the engine I'd built and scaling it up, integrating it with the client's other systems, handling the deep, gnarly, unglamorous problems that only reveal themselves once real weight is on the system. It was work that required someone who understood that platform down to its bones, every decision, every trade-off, every reason it was built the way it was built. It required the architect. And the architect was sitting in the back row being told to support Derek. So I didn't quit. I didn't complain. I didn't sulk either, because sulking is just complaining where people can see it. I did my job, I supported Derek, I went to the meetings, I was pleasant and I waited, and I watched. And I kept my relationship with Aisha exactly as warm and real and responsive as it had always been. Because that relationship was the one asset of mine that no reorganization could touch. When she had a question, I answered it well and fast, the way I always had, even when it was technically Derek's job to. I wasn't doing it to undermine him. I was doing it because that trust was mine. I'd earned it honestly. And I wasn't about to let Derek's promotion make me worse at my actual work out of spite. And I started, quietly, on my own time, after Zoe was asleep, to think about what I actually wanted my future to look like, not the future the firm had planned for me. The one where I supported Derek until I burned out, but a real one. A small, clear voice in me had decided that whatever happened next, I was never going to let myself be invisible again, and I was done waiting for permission to matter. I didn't have a plan yet, but I'd stopped assuming the next chapter would be written by Roger. For the first time in my career, I picked up the pen. And then, right on schedule, reality showed up. Reality always does. You can fool a room of executives with a confident presentation. You cannot fool a running system that is starting to buckle under load. The expansion phase began, and Derek, the principal engineer, the overall lead, sat down to actually run it, and he was utterly lost. Of course he was. He'd never understood the platform, he'd only ever understood how to describe it. There's a world of difference between being able to narrate a thing and being able to do it. And that difference is exactly the gap a person like Derek spends his whole career hiding. But you cannot hide it from the work itself. The first real technical decisions landed on his desk, and he had no idea how to make them. Should the new integration go through the sync layer or around it? What happens to data consistency when you scale this part up tenfold? These were not questions you could blazer your way through. They were questions with right answers and catastrophic wrong answers. And Derek didn't know which was which, because he had never once, in 8 months, actually been inside the thing. So he did what he'd always done. He came to me. He'd appear at my desk, casual, friendly, fishing hey, Mira, when you get a sec. Can you walk me through how the failover handles a partial outage? Trying to get me to hand him the answers so he could carry them upstairs and into client calls as his own insight. And early on, out of habit, out of 15 years of being the reliable team player, I did it. I handed him the answers. And then, one afternoon, watching him nod and jot down my words so he could go perform them in a meeting I wasn't invited to, I stopped. I didn't refuse dramatically. I didn't lecture him. I just got busy. Oh, I'm slammed right now, Derek, but you're the lead. I'm sure you've got a handle on it. I said it pleasantly. I said it the way he'd said 100 pleasant, empty things over the years, and I let the principal engineer be the principal engineer. I let him stand on his own 2 feet, on a platform he didn't understand. In front of a client who had spent 20 years learning to smell exactly this. I stopped being the engine he could quietly bolt his name to. And without that engine, everyone was about to discover. The beautiful car didn't move, and the cracks started to show to the one person it mattered most to. Aisha. Aisha started noticing that when she got on a call now, the answers were vague. That timeline slipped, and the reasons for the slips didn't quite add up. That when she asked a pointed technical question, the kind she used to ask me and get a straight, specific answer to within the hour, the lead would nod thoughtfully and say he'd circle back. And then circle back a few days later with something that sounded confident and meant nothing. Aisha had run engineering teams for 20 years. She had built things with her own hands before she ever managed anyone. She knew, the way a master mechanic knows an engine by its sound, the exact difference between a person who understands a system and a person who has memorized things to say about it. And she knew, because she had worked shoulder to shoulder with her through 8 months of crises, precisely who on that team actually understood it. I imagine there was a particular moment for her, a particular call where Derek fumbled a question that really mattered, where something important was on the line and the lead couldn't lead, when she simply decided she was done routing the most critical work in her year through a man who clearly couldn't do it. She had a business to protect. She had no patience for the politics of who got credit at my firm. That was our problem, not hers. She just wanted the platform built right. So one Tuesday morning, on a status call with our firm's leadership, Roger was on it, Derek was on it, half the management chain was on it. Aisha, the client, the one paying the enormous bill, asked the question that took the whole thing down. She said, and I heard about it within the hour because these things travel through a company like fire through dry grass. Where's Mira? I want Mira on this. I want Mira leading the technical work on the expansion. No offense, Derek, but Mira's the one who actually built this thing, and these are exactly the kinds of problems where I need the person who built it in the room. So going forward, I'd like Mira to be my main point of contact. She asked for me by name. She didn't do it to rescue me. I need you to understand that, because it matters to everything I believe now. Aisha didn't know about the promotion that got stolen, or the hallway conversation, or my 3 a.m. math. She wasn't riding in on a horse to save the overlooked woman. She was a client protecting her own enormous, business-critical project, making a coldly practical decision. And that decision was, I need the person who can actually do this, and everyone who's been near this work knows it isn't the man in the nice blazer. The truth didn't come out because I exposed it. I never said a word against Derek, not one. It came out because the work itself required it, and the work cannot be fooled. Reality asked for me by name. Aisha was just the voice reality happened to use, and in that one sentence, on that one Tuesday call, the entire balance of power in my professional life flipped. Because think about the box that put Roger in. The biggest client the firm had, the one whose renewed and expanded contract was a massive slice of the company's revenue, had just said out loud on a recorded call in front of the whole management chain that she wanted Mira and not Derek, because Mira was the one who actually did the work. Roger could not say no to Aisha. You do not say no to the client who pays for the building you are sitting in. Suddenly, the man who'd patted my shoulder and told me to support Derek needed me, really, truly, urgently needed me, more than he had ever needed Derek's confident slides in his life. And Derek, the principal engineer, the future of the company, had just been publicly identified by the firm's most important client as not the person who could do the job. No memo from me could ever have done that. The work did it, in front of everyone, in a single sentence, and there was no wounded, gracious face Derek could make that would unsay it. Roger came to my desk that afternoon. Personally, the man who'd handed my promotion to Derek and told me to be a team player walked over to my desk, the back row desk. The desk nobody ever came to with a careful, nervous smile, and asked if I had a few minutes to chat about the expansion. And I want to tell you exactly what that felt like. After all those months in the back row, after all those years of being reliable, it felt like the ground, for the first time in my whole career, finally tilting the right way. I did have a few minutes. I had, as it turned out, all the time in the world. Now here is the reckoning, and I'll tell you straight, it didn't look like the movie version. I didn't slam a folder of evidence on Roger's desk. I didn't humiliate Derek in front of the team. I never had to. The work had already said everything the folder would have said, and it had said it in the only language Roger actually understood, the language of the client about to walk. I sat down with Roger, and he did the dance how valued I was, how the client clearly had so much faith in me, how they wanted to make me the technical lead on the expansion, reporting alongside Derek. Alongside Derek, even now, cornered, with the client practically holding a gun to the contract, he was still trying to protect his golden boy, still trying to find a version where I did the work and Derek kept the crown. And the old Mira, the back row Mira, would have taken it. She'd have been so pathetically grateful just to be seen at all that she'd have said yes to doing the lead's job under someone else's name all over again and called it a win. But I wasn't the back row Mira anymore. That woman had died in a conference room months earlier, and I'd been quietly building her replacement ever since. So I looked at Roger, and very calmly, with no anger in my voice at all, because I'd learned from watching Derek that calm is far more powerful than heat. I told him the truth. I said, Roger, I'm going to be direct with you, because I respect you enough not to dance. Aisha didn't ask for a co-lead. She asked for me. And we both know exactly why. Because I built that platform, every important line of it, and everyone who has actually had to do the work on it knows that. I'm glad to lead the expansion. I'd genuinely love to. But I'm not going to do it as anyone's support. And I'm not going to do it alongside the person it was taken from. I'll do it as the lead, with the title, the role, and the salary that should have come with it the first time. And if the firm can't do that, I understand completely. But I think you should know that I've already been offered the chance to go do this exact work somewhere else, where my name is the only one on it. I watched that land on Roger. I watched him do the math he should have done months ago, that the client wanted me, that the contract lived or died on me, that the confident man he'd bet on couldn't do the job, and that the woman he'd told to support Derek was now holding the entire thing in her hands. He went a little pale. He asked me, carefully, what it would take to keep me. And that, right there, was the moment the back row and the front row traded places for good. Because here's the part I haven't told you yet. The part that turned the client's request into real leverage, instead of just a nice feeling. That small, clear voice that had told me to start thinking about my future, I'd actually listened to it. In the weeks after Derek's promotion, quietly, on my own time, I had started having conversations, not schemes, nothing underhanded, just honest, professional conversations about what else was out there for a person who could do what I could do. And the most important of those conversations had been with Aisha herself. It turned out She had been trying, without luck, to hire a head of platform engineering for her own team for the better part of a year. And she had spent 8 months watching me, across 100 crisis calls, solve the exact problems that role existed to solve. The offer was real, and it was specific, and it was a genuine step up, a true leadership role on the client's side, building and running the very platform I had created, for considerably more than my firm had ever paid me, with my name unmistakably on every bit of it. So when I told Roger I'd been offered the chance to do this work somewhere else, I wasn't bluffing, and that's why it worked. I was holding the strongest hand a person can ever hold, in a room like that the one Derek could never hold, no matter how good his slides got. I was genuinely, provably the person the work required, and I had a real and better place to go. And here is what I chose. I want you to hear it, because the choice is the whole lesson. I left. Roger, panicking now, came back within 2 days with all of it the principal title, the lead role, a salary that finally, after years, made the math in my head go quiet. And Derek discreetly moved off the project. They offered me, in the end, more than I had even asked for, because they could finally see that losing me meant losing Aisha, and losing Aisha meant losing the biggest contract the firm had. They offered me Derek's entire stolen kingdom, gift-wrapped, with an apology folded inside. And I said no. I said no, and I went to work for Aisha instead, because I had finally understood something that the back row Mira never could have. That I did not want to win the game at a company that had shown me, in the clearest possible terms, exactly how it treated the people who do the real work. Think about what taking that offer would have actually meant. It would have meant staying at a place where my promotion only happened because a client put a gun to the firm's revenue. Where the title I'd earned through 8 months of midnight work was given to me, grudgingly, only as a hostage negotiation. A place that rewards the Derricks will always, always reward the Derricks. It's not a glitch. It's the operating system. They gave me the crown this time because they were cornered. But the moment the next quiet, talented person came along, and the next confident man in a blazer stood closest to her spotlight, Roger would do the exact same thing all over again. Because Roger had learned nothing, he'd just lost a hand. I did not want to be the grudging exception a broken system makes when it's caught. I didn't want a victory that depended forever on the client staying angry on my behalf. I wanted to go somewhere my work was simply, from the first day, the whole story where I didn't have to be fought for, because no one had ever been allowed to take the credit in the first place. So I took the 2 things that were truly mine, my skill, and the trust I had earned with Aisha over 8 months in the trenches, the 2 things Derek could never touch, no matter how many slides he made, and I walked them right out the front door of that firm. I didn't take a single file. I didn't need to. The only thing of value in that building that actually belonged to me was me, and I put on my coat and I carried it out. Let me tell you how it all settled. Because the justice in this was quiet and complete, and I never had to raise my voice once. Derek's promotion became the noose he'd tied for himself. He was, on paper, still the principal engineer who'd led the famous platform rebuild, and then the architect of that platform left, hired away by the very client he'd been pretending to impress. And Derek was left standing in front of an expansion he could not run, on a system he'd never understood, with no one left to quietly feed him the answers in the hallway. He'd spent his whole career making sure the shark was always nearby. Now the shark was gone, and everyone got to find out, in slow and excruciating detail, Week after week of missed deadlines and answers that didn't hold up, that the remora couldn't swim on his own. He didn't last long after that. You can ride someone else's competence right up until the moment you're alone in deep water, and then the thing you stole turns out to be the exact thing that drowns you. The promotion he took from me was the rope he hanged himself with, because it put him, publicly, in a role that required the one thing he'd never had, and there was nowhere left to hide. Roger reaped what he sowed, too not dramatically, just the slow, grinding consequence of being the kind of leader who rewards confidence over competence. He'd bet his biggest project on the man with the best slides instead of the woman with the best hands, and he lost both of us in a single quarter, his best engineer and his biggest client. Gone, with his own bosses asking him to explain how. I heard the firm struggled with that expansion for a long, expensive time. I felt a flicker of something about that, I won't lie. But it wasn't my problem anymore. I'd stopped trying to fix institutions that were working exactly as designed. And me? I went to work building, on the client side. The very thing I'd created with a team that was mine, a title that was mine, and a name on the work that was finally, unmistakably my own. The raise meant Zoe's daycare stopped being a monthly crisis. It meant I stopped doing math at 3 a.m. It meant I could fix the car, build her a little cushion, breathe air, at last, in a life that had never had any. And the strangest, sweetest part is that I work alongside Aisha now, the woman who asked for me by name, and we have never once talked about how she rescued me. Because she didn't, and we both know it. She just needed the best engineer she'd ever worked with, and that engineer was me, and that simple, undeniable fact turned out to be the only weapon I ever needed. So here is what I learned, and I'll give it to you the way I wish someone had given it to me before I spent 8 months in a back row seat. You cannot stop a certain kind of person from stealing your credit. I want to say that plainly, because we waste so much of our lives trying. The confident, charming, empty people who take what others build, they will always exist. In every office and every industry. And in the short run, they will often win. Because the world hands out trophies to whoever is standing closest to the spotlight. At the moment, the work is finished. The spotlight has terrible eyesight. It can't tell who did the work. It can only see who's standing in it. So if you are the quiet one, the competent one, the one whose work just got walked out of a conference room with someone else's name on it, I am not going to insult you with a promise that the truth always comes out, or that the folder of proof will save you. It usually won't. The folder usually just makes you look like the bitter one and hands your thief the gift of looking gracious while you look small. But here is what they can never take. And this is the thing I most want you to carry out of here tonight. A thief can take the trophy. He cannot take the hands that made it. He can stand in front of the room and claim the finished thing, but he cannot claim the ability to make the next thing. And there is always, always a next thing. That's the secret the Derricks of the world never understand. Because they've never built anything, credit is a story you tell about the past, and it can be stolen, rewritten, performed by anyone with a good enough blazer. But competence is a fact about the future, and it cannot be transferred, faked, or presented. It lives in your hands, and sooner or later it is as reliable as gravity. Somebody is going to need the next thing built. The system will buckle, the hard problem will land, the deadline will come due, and someone with real money on the line is going to go looking for the person who can actually do it. And no presentation in the world can fake its way through that moment. Reality always eventually asks for the real one by name. So stop pouring your one precious life into proving you were robbed. It's a losing game. And worse, it keeps you facing backward, begging an institution for a justice it was never built to give. Turn around and face forward instead. Pour everything you have into becoming so undeniably good at the actual work and so genuinely trusted by the people you actually serve that your value walks with you wherever you go, because it lives in your skill and in your relationships, not in your title, not in your company's org chart, and those two things are the only things on earth that no one can ever put their name on. Build those. And quietly, patiently, you become unstealable. You stop being at the mercy of whoever's nearest the spotlight. You become the one they have to come and find when it actually matters. You become the one they ask for by name. And on that day, you will not need a folder, or an apology, or anyone's permission. You'll just need to decide where you want to take the hands that were always only yours. They gave my work to a man who couldn't do it. And all that did, in the end, was prove to the whole world that the work was only ever going to be mine. If this story reached something in you tonight, if you've ever watched someone else collect the credit for what your own two hands built, share it with someone who needs to hear that their work is theirs, even when the spotlight forgets to find them. Drop a comment and tell me about the time you got passed over and what you built next. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next story.